Well, happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome to yet another Ball Publishing webinar. I'm Chris Beatties, editor of GrowerTalks and Green Profit Magazines and the e-newsletter Acres Online, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so as we tackle today's topic, improve your bottom line with biological active ingredients. Now, you growers are pretty expert at your potting mixes. You know the ingredients in them. You know the percentages of those ingredients and whether or not they hold water or air or they support your nutrients or serve some other function. But you know, ever since the industry moved away from using natural field soils and garden soils and started blending these so-called soilless mixes, we've maybe lost sight of many of those natural living things within the soil that serve to help plants grow. But thankfully, companies like Premier Tech, our sponsor today, are bringing those ingredients back to our potting mixes. That's what we're here to learn about. Now, while I have bought thousands of bags of professional potting mix over the years, most recently just for my home plants, but I used to have a greenhouse, I'm still not the expert on the topic, but I know who is, and there he is right there looking at us. He is Troy Buechel, a grower services specialist for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast U.S. for Premier Tech of Quebec, Canada. Welcome, Troy.
Oh, welcome, Chris. Thank you.
Great to have you here. First of all, I always like to know where you're broadcasting from when we do these webinars, because we can do it anywhere on the planet. We could both be on a couple of beaches somewhere. Somehow, I don't think we are.
No,
we
no.
could be. Where are you from? Where are you today?
Well, I'm from the sprawling metropolis of sunny Quakertown, Pennsylvania.
Quakertown, you're not in Canada.
Not
Where
in
Premier
Canada,
Tech
no,
calls
no.
home. So, but you are again the Mid-Atlantic Northeast U.S. Grower Services Specialist. What does Grower Services Specialist do?
Well, essentially, we're here to help out customers with problems, questions. We do webinars, we do presentations, we do on-site visits, we do testing, recommendations. So we're kind of a jack of all kinds of trades.
All right, but what gives you the qualifications to talk potting mixes?
Well, I woke up one day and decided to do this. No,
That's how it happens to everybody.
yeah,
Same with me in the
exactly. Yeah,
magazine business.
exactly. No, so I have a bachelor's and master's both in horticulture. So that gives me a little bit background. And I've been with Premier. It just recently turned over to 28 years.
Wow, 28 years. That's a great
Yeah,
career. So, and to stick with one thing for that long really does make you an expert.
insane.
Makes you an expert. I've been here 29 years. Am I an expert in the magazine business? Not hardly. But
Well,
speaking of the magazine business, while you are in Quakertown, PA, you said I am right there, broadcasting from high atop the Ball Publishing Studios in West Chicago,
okay.
right underneath the air conditioners of the building. Sometimes they rattle a bit up there, so if you hear that, I put this up to do a little bit of housekeeping here for us because before we get going, we want. I always get questions. The first question is how to ask questions. And what you do is you use the Q&A tool that you'll see there somewhere on your dashboard of your screen. Type it in. If it's, let's see, Jordan already learned how to use it there. It's a great looking lunch, my Superman lunch. But you type it in, and if it's pertinent to the topic that Troy happens to be speaking about at that time, I might interrupt him and say, Troy, Jordan from Schenectady wants to know, why does Superman like beef bourguignon with ketchup? But if it's not pertinent, like that question wasn't, I will save it for the end. We'll have a Q&A period at the end. The second question I always get is this thing going to be archived? If you got to leave early or you want to watch it again or share it with, colleagues or your employees or something like that, we always archive our webinars at the same spot that you signed up, GrowerTalks.com/webinars. And I should have it up and archived, within 45 minutes of us completing this thing. So that is it for the housekeeping. 2 whole slides. Troy, it's now up to you. Go ahead and share your screen and tell us everything that you know, and then a little bit more about how these growers can improve their bottom line with biological active ingredients.
Well, thank you, Chris, and appreciate the introduction here. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about how to use biological active ingredients to improve your bottom line. So we'll go into some actual numbers of what we call ROI, or return on investment. But before we get into that, we should probably talk about what is, let me just see here, having a little, there we go. Just having a few windows pop up here, so I'm just taking care of them. All right, so what are active ingredients? So active ingredients are really a combination or individually a bacterium, fungi, or maybe a streptomycetes, along with their byproducts they produce that are essentially used to enhance plant growth, reduce plant disease, and or reduce insect populations. So they're really there to help stimulate the plant in some way, shape, or form. And we have two different categories. We have what we call biostimulants, which will be the first half of the presentation, and biocontrols which will be the second half of the presentation. Now with those, let me just see here. All right, good, we got that down. So there's three categories of, shall we say, biological organisms that are used for these particular, biocontrols or biostimulation. So biostimulation generally is, at least right now in our industry, we're looking at the fungi and the bacteria categories to accommodate that. For the biocontrol, we're looking at those same two categories, and in addition, streptomycetes that are currently being used on the market to help with basically with disease problems. So biostimulants, as a general category, they're microorganisms that colonize plant roots. So let me explain a little bit why they colonize plant roots. When plants produce photosynthates from the process of photosynthesis, the photosynthates travel through the plant, and the parts of the plant that need those photosynthates use it. Well, eventually it works its way down in the root system, and whatever the plant doesn't use gets leaked out the end of the roots, and they're called, what we call them, photosynthetes or root exudates. Those root exudates are like food for most biological organisms, especially your microorganisms, I should say. So they will tend to colonize the roots because there's a food source there. This is true with biostimulants as well as biocontrols. Basically, these organisms receive benefit from eating basically the exudates from the roots of the plant. So in the biostimulant category, we have bacteria and we have fungi. And the majority of the biostimulants that are in the fungi world are with mycorrhizal fungi, which we'll go into further detail on. The goal of these organisms is they somehow enhance plant growth. So it could be either through faster rooting, or we get a more developed root system of the plant. We'll see in a little bit, some, for instance, will increase root hair production on the plant root system, increasing the overall growth of that. And if you have overall improved growth of your plant's root system, you also see an improvement in the top growth of the plant as well. So sometimes you get bigger plants, increased fruit production, increased flower production. And overall, if you're growing a faster quality, a faster plant, producing a faster plant, I should say, you can actually shorten your crop time, shave off a couple days or even a week. And with any biostimulant, you want to check it out, make sure that they're compatible with the pesticides you're using in your current program. So check those labels out closely. So looking at biostimulation, specifically in root production, we take a look at these two Petri dishes on the left-hand side, and we see that the one on the left, you see the roots there. They're just kind of long, skinny roots, as you'd be typically seeing with seedlings. But notice the ones on the right, they have a lot more fuzz on them, which are actually root hairs, which you see in the picture all the way to the right. Those root hairs are important because root hairs are actually the point in which plant roots take up nutrients and water. It doesn't come from the fat part of the roots, it comes through those root hairs. So if you can stimulate the production of root hairs, in this case by a Bacillus bacterium, what that'll do is that'll translate into better uptake of nutrients and water by the plant. In the fungus world, again, as I mentioned, the majority of the biostimulants would be mycorrhizae. And in the world of mycorrhizae, there's multiple categories, but the two main ones would be your ectomycorrhizae and your endomycorrhizae. Basically, the difference in the naming, ectomycorrhizae colonize the outside of the plant root, and endomycorrhizae colonize within the internal structure of the plant root. So ectomycorrhizae will colonize mostly trees and shrubs. So it's ideal for nursery production. But ectomycorrhizae really don't colonize a lot of your greenhouse crops, things such as annuals, perennials, cannabis, mums. It won't harm the plants if you have ectomycorrhizae in with greenhouse crops. Just simply the greenhouse crops will not utilize the mycorrhizal fungi or the ectomycorrhizal fungi. On the flip side, we have endomycorrhizae. They colonize mostly herbaceous plants, so your annuals, your perennials, your vegetables, your cannabis, mums. It can colonize about 80 to 85% of the plants in the world. So it's a pretty broad range. Endomycorrhizae will tend to provide greater amount of benefits for greenhouse crops, but the flip side of that is It's not the best to use for trees and shrubs only because it doesn't colonize most of the trees and shrubs. It will colonize things such as maples or things in the Rosaceae, apples, pears in that family as well. So this is a listing of some of the endomycorrhizae and ectomycorrhizae. I'm just simply showing this just to give you an idea that there are different organisms out there. So if you're buying, let's say you're putting on your own mycorrhizae, you're buying a cocktail, which is fine. Take a look at what's in the cocktail. Obviously, the ectomycorrhizae will not benefit greenhouse crops, which is what we're going to focus this presentation on. But they're great and needed for trees and shrubs. So if the organism is in a glomus category or gigaspora, it's probably an endomycorrhizae, or it is an endomycorrhizae. If it's in a rhizopogon, Physiolithius, or even scleroderma, chances are that would be your ectomycorrhizae. So just to give you an idea. So focusing on the greenhouse crop production, so we're going to focus on endomycorrhizae. That will finish out our biostimulation conversation. If we take a look at the plant or the pictures of these roots, so the one on the left just shows regular roots with no colonization. The one on the right shows the same types of roots with the actual mycorrhizal fungi colonizing the root system of the plant. So if we take a look at that, we see a lot of hyphae, which would be kind of the webbing. That's kind of the vegetative structure of the mycorrhizal fungi. And the little dots we see in there, those dots are what we call spores. And spores to fungi are the same as seeds to plants. It's kind of the long-term storage unit of the organism. So we take a look at how colonization occurs. As a root grows through the growing media or the soil, and it comes in close proximity to a spore for mycorrhizal fungi, the root exudates will stimulate the mycorrhizal spore to germinate. It will send a hyphae, which then grows to the root. It will basically penetrate the root and colonize the root. It'll form some structures once it's set up. And once those structures are formed, then it'll produce additional hyphae that will grow out beyond the root system, out into the surrounding growing media or soil environment, where it will then help to serve as an extension of the root system, bring in water and nutrients where plant roots aren't currently present. So in general, the hyphae increase the total absorptive area of the roots. Colonization takes about 2 to 4 weeks in that type of situation, mostly 2 to 3 weeks for most crops. We do see an improvement in uptake of phosphorus, copper, manganese, zinc. We've also seen nitrogen and iron as well. And there's also improved uptake of water. What is interesting is we see with mycorrhizal fungi, it self-regulates. So if it's taking up excessive amounts of nutrients, it will actually regulate the amount that goes back to the plant. So generally it doesn't overdo the uptake. And actually we're finding it screens some of the heavy metals as well, some of the more toxic ones, so the plant doesn't actually receive them. Now, this is a mutualistic symbiotic relationship between the plant and the mycorrhizal fungi. So the plant in turn provides the mycorrhizal fungi with its own photosynthase as a food source. So that'd be carbohydrates and starches. And we also see with mycorrhizae that the plant itself can actually provide some protection for the mycorrhizal fungi from pathogens that would attack it. So you look at the overall picture, because of the enhanced nutrient uptake and water uptake, plants will then be able to survive nutrient deficiencies and let's say drought conditions better with the mycorrhizal fungi. So what will happen is plants with mycorrhizal fungi will grow normally and continue to grow normally longer term versus those that don't have the mycorrhizal fungi, because they will succumb to the stresses of lack of fertilizer, lack of water. So bottom line, the greater the stress, the more likely the mycorrhizae is going to shine through as being a far superior growth promotion for the plant. And again, the plant's not growing faster than its normal rate. It's just simply growing at its normal rate, where the ones that are not receiving the proper nutrition just simply aren't growing very well at all. So the bottom line is it minimizes nutritional deficiencies, and it will benefit plants throughout the entire crop production cycle. Mycorrhizal fungi cannot survive without the plant, so it is necessary to actually live and survive on that plant. So the benefits of endomycorrhizal fungi at the grower level, obviously with enhanced nutrient water uptake, we can certainly see that there's going to be fewer nutritional problems. It's going to delay the onset of nutrient deficiencies, and it will help reduce water stress in crops. We also see faster establishment of the plant when it transplants up from one size to another. We see faster growth in the plant, and in some cases, there's potential for reducing the actual crop time because the plant will mature faster. We do see enhanced crop quality and uniformity. One thing I see a lot, especially with vegetable growers, I see this a lot in pansies as well, tomatoes, New Guinea impatiens, crops that aren't fertilized much. We do tend to see a little bit more uneven growth in them because of the lack of fertilizer that's applied. So you tend to see tall plants next to short plants. And that can be a bit of a problem, but if you have mycorrhizal fungi that can help mine out the growing media more efficiently, it'll probably even up those plants a little bit more, or just simply increase in fertilizer rate would probably take care of that problem as well. And the other thing we got to think about is mycorrhizal fungi will help to reduce plant shrinkage. And what I mean by that is shrinkage are plants that are simply not saleable. They could be saleable because they're dead, obviously, but they could also be unsaleable because maybe they're nutrient deficient, don't look good. Maybe they're stunted because of nutrient deficiency. Maybe they have an insect or disease problem, but that's all part of your shrinkage. And mycorrhizae can help with that shrinkage. And we'll also find out later, so can your biocontrols as well. For the retailer garden center, in that situation, fertilization and watering tends to be a bit more compromised because you're dependent on help that may or may not know how to do it properly. There may be time constraints. I mean, everybody's busy. It's sometimes watering and fertilization, it becomes more of a challenge. So again, if you have the mycorrhizal fungi, it will help the plant go through that stress of lack of water, lack of fertilization. That can therefore extend the shelf life of the plants and reduce losses. So there's a great benefit there. And for the end user, so the landscaper, the homeowner, what they'll see is when they take the plant out of the pot and they transplant it into the soil, or maybe they're putting it in a container, what they'll see is the mycorrhizal fungi will grow out of that root ball into the surrounding soil or soilless media environment very rapidly compared to roots, which will help the roots eventually transition over. So you get reduced transplant shock and faster plant establishment. And let's face it, you also get the reduction of nutrient deficiencies and water stress on the plant by using mycorrhizal fungi. So how do you, shall we say, apply the mycorrhizal fungi? There's basically three different ways to look at it. One, you can apply it as a granular material. Granular would have to be pre-mixed into the growing media prior to planting. There's also a powder form. A powder can be, sometimes it depends on the company. It can be mixed with water and applied as a post-plant drench, which is kind of nice. But just keep it agitated because the spores don't actually dissolve in water. It'll kind of, a lot of them will probably sink. Or the other way you can use a powder is you can turn it into like a slurry, or you can use a dry powder itself and dip the root ball of the plant you're going to transplant up, or the cutting, if you're starting cuttings under mist propagation, you can use that as an application. Or the last thing, which is probably the easiest, is get the growing media already pre-amended with the mycorrhizal fungi. So there's no labor, there's no cost to apply it. And it also avoids costly application errors. As an example, let's say you're putting on too much mycorrhizal fungi. It won't harm the plant, but you're kind of wasting your money, or maybe you don't put on enough and you don't get the benefit out of it. So again, it's easier to get a pre-incorporated. So let's look at some of the benefits of endomycorrhizal fungi. Peppers don't have to say much here. Obviously, they grew better having the endomycorrhizal fungi present. In the case of transplant, so these plants were grown in the greenhouse, in growing media, either amended with endomycorrhizal fungi or not, and then transplanted out to the field. So on the left-hand side, we see celery. Notice the first 4 rows on the left-hand side, the diameter of the plants are bigger than the ones on the right. So the reason why they're bigger is because, again, you get that enhanced nutrient uptake. The mycorrhizal fungi is helping to go through stressful environment. And look at the quality of the soil. You can see that doesn't have a lot of organic matter in it, so it probably is lacking nutrients. So it helps the plant tolerate that environment. The same can be said about the asparagus in the right side of the photograph, or in the right photograph. Again, notice the height of the plant is much taller, the diameter is bigger. Again, it's not that the plant's growing super fast, it's just simply growing at its normal rate, whereas the plants that don't have the mycorrhizal fungi are challenged because of the lack of fertilizer in the soil and the poor quality of the soil itself. And here's an example of nutrient uptake. We look at Nicotian on the left. It's kind of obvious when you look at that. The ones with the mycorrhizal fungi, the plants are a little bit bigger and a little bit darker green, showing enhanced nutrient uptake. On the right, we see bell peppers growing, and we see the ones with the mycorrhizal fungi are darker green and a little bit bigger in diameter than those without. And I will say, since this was in my own personal garden, over time, The ones with the mycorrhizae, the plants grew faster because again, they don't have nutrient deficiency, and they ended up producing more peppers as a result because the plants are bigger in the long run. Post-harvest stress. So take a poinsettia, water it with clear water for 6 weeks, and let's see what happens. Well, with endomycorrhizae, we find that after 6 weeks of clear water, the cyathea, which are the little yellow flowers, the true flowers on the poinsettia, still are on the plant. And also a lot of the lower leaves are still on the plant. Those without the mycorrhizal fungi, cyathea dropped off, and a lot of lower leaves have dropped off. So there's a big difference in stress management there. Now let's look at shrinkage. So a typical grower, professional grower, will see shrink about 3 to 5% in their crop. Again, that could be plants that are dead, or it could be plants that are maybe malformed because of whatever may have happened, or it could be nutritional problem or an insect or disease problem. When we go to retail, our shrinkage increases to 5 to 15%, because again, the TLC is probably not quite as good because again, everybody's busy. So it makes it more difficult. So you tend to lose more plants that way. Now, keep in mind, mycorrhizal fungi can help reduce the risk of shrink that comes from improper watering and fertilization or from environmental stress. So what I want to do is I want to go through a numerical example. We're going to look at applying a return on investment when it comes to the grower level, and then we're going to take those same plants at the grower level, sell them at the retail level, and see the return on investment there as well. So first, if we take a look at return on investment at the grower level, the wholesaler, so we're in this example, we're going to say we're going to produce 20,000 10-inch hanging baskets, and the market value of the wholesale price is, according to 2020 floriculture crops, the USDA statistics, it's $8.70 per pot, $174,000 for that crop. Now, the first box on the left-hand side, the upper box, we look at typical shrinkage, which in this case, at the grower level, we're going to say is about 3%. There is no additional investment in mycorrhizal fungi, so we consider that zero. So 3% of 20,000 baskets is 600 baskets. So there's a total loss of $5,220. Now, if we introduce the mycorrhizae in the box on the right, there is an initial upfront cost of $680 to do those 20,000 10-inch hanging baskets. But if we reduce our loss from 3% down to 2%, instead of losing 600 baskets, now we're only losing 400 baskets, subtract those two numbers, we see a shrinkage in that lower box of 1,740 that we're actually saving because we're not seeing as much shrinkage. Subtract off the cost of the mycorrhizae, and our net gain is $1,060. So even though there's an upfront cost of putting the mycorrhizae in the growing media, we can see that by having it in there, it can actually reduce some shrinkage, which will then make more saleable plants. So grower has potential of making more money on their own existing crop. And keep in mind, mycorrhizae will help to improve overall crop and plant quality. So even the ones that look good may even look slightly better as a result. Now, let's say that wholesaler now sells it to the retailer. So in that case, shrinkage is a little bit higher. So typical shrinkage, so upper left-hand box here, we're looking at initial investment, it's zero because we're not introducing mycorrhizal fungi. But let's say they have an average of a 10% loss at retail. So if you're dealing with 20,000 10-inch baskets, that means 10% of that would be 2,000 baskets with a loss of $17,400 for that retailer. If we instead grow those same plants with mycorrhizal fungi, there is an initial investment of $680, which we talked about before. But keep in mind that $680 was factored in to the wholesale demonstration in the previous slide. So actually that doesn't come out here. But let's say we reduce our loss from 10% to 7%. So instead of losing 2,000 baskets, we're only losing 1,400 baskets. Do the math between them. Our shrink is $5,280 or $5,220. That's the amount of shrink. Let me rephrase that. That's the savings because the shrinkage is reduced. Mycorrhizae was already considered in the wholesale example, so we don't have to subtract it again. So we take this, let's add them both up. So from the grower's example, the wholesaler, he saves $1,060 at his location. He sells it to the garden center. They save $5,220 because, again, reduction of shrinkage. Net result is, just in this one example, $6,280 of a net gain on 20,000 10-inch hanging baskets. So the bottom line is this: if you can reduce your shrinkage, you can pay for the mycorrhizal fungi addition many times over. So that was the biostimulant. Now we're going to go into the biocontrol discussion. So with the biocontrols, you're basically, focusing on the plant disease portion of it. The goal is to reduce the incidence of foliar and root diseases depending on the product and how it's applied. They are preventative. They do not cure existing disease problems. So you have to have the organism growing on the root system or on the foliage of the plant first before it can prevent disease in the future. Now, having it there will slow the development of diseases. It can reduce plant loss. That's especially true more for roots than it is for foliar. And it can overall improve plant quality, whether it's foliar disease or root disease. The bottom line is it will save you money, but there is an upfront cost of putting the biocontrol in the growing media or on the foliage of the plant. If you can reduce the number of pesticide applications, pesticides cost money. There's also labor involved and time involved. If you can cut out a few of those, maybe one or two, that will oftentimes more than pay for the addition of the biocontrol. And of course, not to mention, you can reduce your exposure to chemical fungicide or fungicide materials simply if you don't have to apply it. Now, you can use biocontrols in combination with chemical controls. It's not a one or the other. You can actually use them together. So it's part of a IPM type program. So some of the biocontrol basics, as I mentioned, it's preventative. It cannot cure an existing disease problem. You have to wait for the populations to build up after the application. So it may take 48 hours with some, it may take a couple of weeks with others, but for the most part, usually within a couple of days to a week, you pretty much get your protection starting. This is not an apply, kill, and done type scenario like it is with some chemicals. This takes a little bit of time. And also just a little bit of, kind of a little wives' tale. Applying a higher rate of a biocontrol does not mean you get better control. It just simply means you're flooding more microorganisms in there that the plant probably can't utilize or can't support. So bottom line is I would recommend following the application rates and using what's recommended by the manufacturer. Now, with biocontrols, it can suppress a broad range of plant pathogens. So you want to observe the product label to determine what those are. They are part of the tool in root disease suppression. So we're going to focus on, because it's growing media, we're going to focus on root diseases from this point forward. We do tend to find biocontrols are not as effective under high disease pressure situations. So that could be situations such as last year I grew a crop, I had significant Pythium damage all the way through my greenhouse. So a really good chance there's a lot of Pythium inoculum. So that could be more challenging. Or in situations where the plants are overwatered, they're just not growing very well. That will make them more susceptible to being attacked by root disease as well. Many biocontrols do have temperature and moisture restrictions during use, so you want to just check that. There's temperature restrictions on the storage of the actual organism, as well as there could be some temperature restrictions within actual growth production. So biocontrol considerations. Well, number one, biocontrols are living organisms. They work differently than chemical pesticides, which we just talked about. In the case of root zone management, remember that the biocontrols are preventative, they're not curative. It's a big thing to keep in mind. Now, we want to look at the biocontrol, we want to look at the span of pathogen suppression. So we want to make sure that the pathogens that you're dealing with are covered by the biocontrol that you're using. Keep in mind with biocontrols, if the temperature dips below 50 degrees Fahrenheit within the growing media, that will reduce the activity of the biocontrol organism. So it won't reproduce nearly as quickly. It won't produce the antibodies very quickly. So it will reduce the effectiveness of it. So you want to try to keep your growing media temperatures warm. And also look at your pesticide compatibility. Some microorganisms are more sensitive to chemicals, pesticides than others. So you want to make sure you know where that falls in. Storage requirements. Generally, they need to be stored cool. They do not tolerate heat very well, nor do they tolerate freezing. And shelf life on some of the products are less than 1 year. There's some I've seen that are as short as 3 months, as long as they're stored refrigerated, but some can last up to 2 years. And some products will require repeated application. So again, look at the label, make sure you follow the label according to instructions. So why use biocontrol specifically in growing media? Well, the goal is to reduce the incidence of root disease. It can therefore reduce plant loss if you don't have that root disease going after the roots. I do want to point out that biocontrols are not a guarantee that you will never have root disease. That's simply not true. If you have light disease pressure, it will probably take care of it without the need of chemicals. If you have moderate, you probably have to put in a little chemical once in a while. If you have heavy disease pressures, you may have to apply pesticides more frequently. But the bottom line is that biocontrols can save money. There is an upfront cost, of course, but if you can reduce fungicide drenches, those drenches sometimes are maybe a little bit less or a little bit more than the cost of the biocontrol. So if you save one drench by using the biocontrol, you may end up paying for the biocontrol organism, which is kind of nice. Again, biocontrols are another option in your IPM toolbox. Again, we don't expect biocontrols to be the end-all end. You will have to probably use chemicals from time to time and maybe some other control methods as well. Here's a great thing. Some of your biocontrols can be used for organic growing. And we know in organic production, it's difficult to find chemicals that will actually work well to control root disease. So if we have an organism that you put in the media, hey, that's all great. You can take care of root diseases in organic production. And having that organism in the growing media does introduce a bit of peace of mind, knowing that there's something working 24/7 to help protect your crop. So what are the advantages of biocontrols in your growing media during crop production? Well, first of all, there's little to no plant, human, or animal toxicities that we're aware of. Second, they're natural. They were discovered in natural environment. They basically, in the natural soil environment, they basically compete for space and food with plant pathogens. They're part of normal checks and balances in the natural soil environment. The problem is in a soilless media environment, you have far fewer microorganisms. So what ends up happening is pathogens can take over very quickly because there's kind of like a biological vacuum there. That's why it's good to have biocontrols in there so they can help kind of keep them at bay, so to speak. It's hard to become resistant to basically a microorganism, so you don't see the resistance build up with plant pathogens using a biocontrol. There's little to no REI. So what does REI mean? Probably a lot of you know what that means, but it's restricted entry interval. So after you apply a pesticide, if let's say it's a 4-hour REI, that means for the 4 hours after the material's applied, the only way you can go back into that greenhouse is you have to be fully suited up with a respirator, whatever the requirements are of that chemical. After 4 hours, you can walk in normal clothing, everything's fine. With a lot of the biological biocontrols, the REI is 0, so you don't have to go back in and suit up. You can go back in after application. Many are listed with Armory for organic use. Here's the benefit. Biocontrol can extend beyond you as the grower. You can actually extend that to the retailer and eventually to the consumer, the end user of the product. So that's kind of nice to have that biocontrol continue to go forward. And we know consumers do not like the chemicals. So when you're using biocontrols, it just kind of plays into the nice package of saying, hey, we can grow our plants with fewer chemicals or no chemicals. So in the biocontrol, there's basically 3 categories. The first one I want to talk about are the fungal biocontrol that can be used in growing media. The fungal ones are a little bit more sensitive than some of the other ones. They're great products. They do have a little bit more of a limited shelf life, so you want to respect the amount of time of which you can use the product. They can be sensitive to a little bit more higher temperatures, so it requires cool storage. That's pretty much true with all of them. These just tend to be a little bit more, they are very effective when they're stored correctly. The mode of action, one thing that's unique about the fungal biocontrols would be parasitism. So if you think about it, most of your pathogens that attack root systems are fungi. So the fungal biocontrols will actually coil around the outside of the pathogenic fungus and will actually inject enzymes or other toxins into that fungus and suck the innards out and basically use it as food source. So we'll kill it that way. The second mode of action is competition. So when there's a lot of food coming off of that root system, again, these guys are feeding from the root exudates. They will grow on the root and basically form a biofilm around the outside of the root system. That biofilm then will make it difficult for plant pathogens to actually penetrate and get to the root itself. Antibiotics, not real common in this category. That's more for the bacteria and streptomycetes. So some of the products that we hear about, Root Shield, everybody knows Root Shield, Root Shield Plus, great products, Soil Guard, all good products in the fungal category. Second category would be streptomycetes, and streptomycetes are good. They're a little bit more accepting of different types of temperature regimes. They're not quite as sensitive. They can have a pretty long shelf life. A lot of them are up to 18 months, so they're really good with that. Their mode of action is they will produce cell wall degrading enzymes, which will basically burn holes into the like the pythium and the rhizoctonium, whatever it is, and basically the inner contents kind of leak out, and they will eat that content that comes out. They will also produce antibiotics, which is like a natural fungicide that when the plant pathogen comes towards the biocontrol and it hits that area where the antibiotic is being produced, it tends to push that pathogen away and it won't come in. Another one is through competition, and that is growing on the outside, forming this rhizosphere, this kind of coating around the outside, the biofilm around the outside of the root. Again, makes it difficult for pathogens to penetrate. Two examples, everybody's probably heard of Actinovate, and Mycostop is another good product to help with root disease. And the last category, bacterial biocontrols to incorporate in growing media. They do have a long shelf life, similar to the streptomycetes. They have wide temperature toleration, again, similar to streptomycetes. Mode of action, they are a little bit, they basically will produce antibiotics, which is the natural fungicide, and competition, which is like the biofilm forming around the outside of the root system of the plant. Some examples, so the Bacillus subtilis, we have Cease, Rhapsody, and Serenade, all good products. I'll give a shot at the second one, Bacillus amyloliquefaciens. If I say it fast enough, it sounds good, right? So we have Companion Max, and of course the Bacillus pumilus, which we found in the Promix biofungicide or the Promix biofungicide plus mycorrhizae. So what does this look like, this biofilm and all that? So let's go back to one of the earlier examples. We're going to go back to the Bacillus pumilus. The upper picture shows the root hairs on the root system of the plant. Those root hairs, again, because there's more of them, there's enhanced nutrient and water uptake. But let's look at the lower picture. There in the middle, that would be the actual root, kind of darker structure, and that haze around to the left-hand side, and it's also on the right-hand side, is the actual biofilm of the Bacillus pumilus bacteria growing around the outside of the root. In the case of the Bacillus pumilus, it takes about 48 hours to colonize root, so it's very fast. And again, the biofilm makes a barrier that makes it difficult for pathogens to penetrate. This one I'm kind of excited about. In this picture, it's a lot to look at. So all the way over to the left, we have what we call the inoculated root. So the darker middle part is the actual root itself, and the white kind of ring around the outside of it would be the production of the biocontrol, the Bacillus bacterium. Now, all the webbing throughout that whole picture, that is endomycorrhizal fungi, and the little yellow dots would be the spores of the endomycorrhizal fungi. So if we take a look at that, that has, there's a big network there, but if you notice, some of the mycorrhizal fungi, the hyphae, are fattened. There's like this bluish gray haze around them. And that bluish gray haze is basically a biofilm of the Bacillus bacteria around the hyphae of the mycorrhizal fungi. So what I want to point out here is that this doesn't happen in all symbiotic relationships, but between the mycorrhizae and the Bacillus pumilus, we see not only is it growing on the root system of the plant, but now it's growing on the hyphae of the mycorrhizal fungi. Why? Just like with the roots, there are exudates that the mycorrhizal fungi doesn't use up. It leaks out through its hyphae, and that's feeding the bacteria. So now we have the super powerhouse of biocontrol, because we have these bacteria kind of littered throughout the entire growing media. Not only are they growing on the root system, but they're growing on the mycorrhizal fungi, making this more of a difficult environment for plant pathogens to get established. So let's challenge some plants. Let's actually purposely give them disease, and let's see what happens. So on the left, we have impatiens that were inoculated with rhizoctonia. On the right, geraniums with pythium. So we see that some have the biocontrol and some do not. The ones without, obviously, the plants are not doing well. In some cases, they're actually dying. In the case of geraniums, the plants are they're still viable, but they're a lot smaller. Again, because the pathogen is nipping at the roots, it's affecting nutrient uptake, water uptake, so the plants just are not growing as vigorously. Rex begonia, just excuse me for the quality of the picture, but you can still see what's going on. So we take cuttings, we insert them into a tray. We find that with a biofungicide, sometimes we get a faster rooting and faster initial growth, which allows those cuttings to come to basically come to maturity faster. This particular customer is able to shave off a week to 2 weeks off of their propagation time with these Rex begonias simply by using a biofungicide type product. In the case of pansies, so on the left, we have the combination inoculation of both the biocontrol and the biostimulant, so the bacillus and the glomus, which is the mycorrhizae. Notice the plants are a little bit bigger than the ones on the right, and they're also less chlorotic, again, showing the enhanced nutrient uptake. In the case of this picture, we have New Guinean patients. Again, on the left, they have the active ingredients, the biocontrol, and the mycorrhizae, and on the right, we have plants that are not. Notice, first of all, the plants with the active ingredients are bigger and they're less chlorotic, again, showing the enhancement of nutrient uptake and improved plant growth. So the ones on the left are growing at their normal rate. The ones on the right are not growing at their normal rate because of the lack of nutrients. And another one, again, showing lack of nutrients. We have salvia. The ones on the left are taller and fewer or smaller percentage of them are chlorotic versus the ones on the right. Again, the biocontrol or the bioadditives or active ingredients are helping to reduce the effects of nutritional stress on the plant. So we take a look at using products. Obviously, there's a lot of different types of chemical fungicides we can use to help control root disease organisms. You want to take a look at this and put this matrix against your biocontrol. So first of all, we have the first one there, the Promix biofungicide, the mycorrhizae. That's the only biocontrol we have on there. But again, does it control the organisms that you're most concerned about? You want to make sure so that when you use it, it will control what you need. Pythium being kind of the number one root disease, pretty much a lot of these materials do take care of it, including a lot of the biologicals are also very effective against Pythium as well. So let's start looking at some of the return on investment from a cost perspective. So first of all, we're going to look at, in this slide, the upcharge by adding the biocontrol. The second slide, we're going to look at how that compares to chemical fungicide drenches. If we save a drench, what do we get back in return? And the third one, we're going to look at if we can reduce some of the shrinkage, what kind of return do we get by using a biocontrol? So first one, we're taking, and we're going to fill up, we're going to produce 1 yard of growing media. We're going to add a biocontrol to it. That biocontrol is introducing an additional $17.25 to that 1 yard of growing media. That 1 yard of growing media, going down to our chart now, will fill 1,944 4.5-inch azalea pots or 141 10-inch hanging baskets. The next line would be the wholesale cost based on 2020 statistics. So we know they're a little bit higher now, but that's the wholesale cost. Third line is the cost per container, what the additional cost is to add in that biocontrol. So in the case of a 4.5-inch azalea pot, we're looking at less than a penny. And in the case of a 10-inch hanging basket, we're looking at 12.2 cents. So not a lot of additional cost. If we go down to the last line, we look at what percentage of cost is that compared to the actual wholesale cost of the product. And again, in the case of the 4.5-inch azalea pot, the biocontrol only added a little bit more than 0.5% increase in cost. 10-inch basket, a little bit less than 1.5% increase in cost. Again, not huge costs, but the actual upfront cost is not really where we need to be focusing. We need to be focusing on other areas. The second area I want to focus on, and we're going to use a different example. Here we're going to use putting growing media in 10,000 10-inch hanging baskets and what it's going to cost to, first of all, put a drench on versus the cost of putting in this case, biofungicide and mycorrhizae together, and what the difference is for savings or even a little bit of loss. So one thing I want to mention is pretty much all the chemical fungicide drenches have an REI. So keep that in mind that there's a period of time when you can't go back in the greenhouse after applying the material without wearing the suit and the respirator. So the cost per drench, so if we drench 10,000 10-inch hanging baskets, here's what the approximate cost will be for each of those chemicals. So for instance, 3336 will cost you $590 to do that drench. How much will it cost to put in the biofungicide and the mycorrhizae? Well, it's about $685 to to basically inoculate 10,000 tenant hanging baskets. So if we subtract the second column from the first column, we end up with the fact that, okay, at this point, by adding the biocontrol, the biofungicide and mycorrhizae, we're still behind by $95, but that's okay because for a $95 investment, we just were able to save one fungicide drench application. If you start rolling back in what the cost is for labor to apply it, the time to mix the chemical, apply it, clean up, you may actually end up chewing up that $95 and actually starting to lose money. So what I'm trying to say, well, not lose money, but what I'm trying to say here, if we take and reduce one chemical fungicide drench, which is what that cost is in that middle column, oftentimes to reduce one fungicide drench, it may end up paying for the actual addition of the biofungicide to mycorrhizae. So we take a look at Medallion, great chemical. It's a little bit costlier to apply. If we take the cost of the drench, subtract off the cost of the additive, we find that we are able to save $800 if we can cut off that one Medallion drench. So again, this just gives you an idea that saving one chemical fungicide drench will, in some cases, save you money. In some cases, maybe not so much, but it still saves you some money. And that's the point of this. If you save two drenches, in that case, it will always save you money. So just give you a reference point. Now let's look at a different example. This particular one, instead of 10,000 10-inch pots, we're going to look at different pot sizes. So we have our 10,000 10-inch hanging baskets, but now we also have 10,000 4.5-inch azalea pots. So first line is the crop value based on wholesale prices. Next one is shrinkage. So here we're looking at a 5% shrinkage. On 4.5-inch azalea pots, 5% shrinkage on $15,600 is $780. The same goes with the 10-inch hanging baskets. If we can cut that shrinkage in half, our loss will then be, so we potentially can basically save $390 due to shrinkage in the 4.5-inch azalea pots, or $2,175 in the 10-inch hanging baskets. This is gain because of reduced loss due to shrinkage. If we subtract off the cost of the biofungicide and the mycorrhizae, take those out, then we come to our final line, which are red numbers. That's how much money you will save if you can cut your shrinkage in half because you're using the biofungicide and mycorrhizae product. So in general, between saving on the chemical fungicide drenches and reducing crop loss or shrink, we can end up more than paying for the additional costs of applying the biocontrol. So biocontrols can help reduce fungicide drenches by up to 50%. That's the feedback we've been getting. So if crops are drenched 1 to 4 times throughout the growing season, just think about it. If you cut out 1 or 2 drenches, it'll probably end up, may not always save you money, but if you cut both the cost of the chemical because you don't have to apply it and also the cost associated with crop loss, overall you can end up saving money. And we do have a calculator on our website, pthorticulture.com. You can take a look at that, go to that website, and you can actually see how much savings you can actually have by plugging in the cost of the chemical you're using and just seeing, does the mycorrhizae or the biofungicide make sense for you? If the biocontrol is pre-incorporated into the growing media, it's kind of nice because there's no additional labor to apply it or any additional cost to apply it. So looking at it pre-incorporated makes more sense because there's less labor. And let's face it, labor is a problem these days. So if you have one less thing that you have to do or you have to pay an employee to do, it's even better. And many biocontrols do have a 0 REI, as I mentioned earlier, so that will help to reduce your reduce that that problem with having to not be able to go in the greenhouse unless you're suited up. And the thing is, biocontrols can reduce plant stress, increasing plant quality, not only by reduction of root disease, but also can enhance, in some cases, some nutrient uptake and stimulate a little bit more root production. So if you have an overall better quality plant, you're spending a lot less time having to correct problems that with the biocontrol no longer exist. So in summary, we have a wide choice of active ingredients available for growers these days. They fall into 2 categories, either biostimulation or biocontrol. They're basically designed to help improve overall crop performance. Each one has a specific application, so make sure it works for what you're doing. Check the label, make sure your storage and product use can be respected, and look at also your storage as far as temperature as well. They really are easy to use. You apply them as a drench, you put them on, and you have them pre-incorporated or pre-mix them in. Pretty much once that happens, they're pretty much ready to go. They're part of an IPM program. So again, it's not the end all in, but they will help to reduce or suppress root disease problems. And last thing I think is important, again, if you're an organic grower, a lot of these products are able to be used for organic production. So by all means, use them because it's a lot easier than finding a chemical to control these pathogens. And with that, I want to thank you for listening, and I appreciate your time. And I think I'll turn it over to Chris and see what he has as far as questions.
We've got questions, Troy.
Got questions.
That was a fabulous, fabulous presentation. Absolutely fabulous. Turn off your screen share so we can see your face a little bit bigger as you tackle some of these questions that did come in. They cover a range of topics, and I've jotted down a bunch myself. So let's start out with a skeptic in the audience. Stacy asks, is there really data that shows that a biostimulant can reduce shrink by 3% or some number? Where do you get the idea that you're going to cut your shrink?
So basically with cutting the shrink, obviously that number, we picked that number as an example to see what we can potentially do. Because a lot of people say, well, if I use this stuff, it won't really make a big difference. Well, actually it does. So if you go back and look at the examples of crops that were grown by customers that didn't look very good, but when they used the biologicals, they did, it's pretty obvious the ones with the biologicals look better. They sold faster and right away. And we know as we go into the growing season, if we got plants that are lagging behind, it's going to become more and more difficult to sell them. And of course, later in the season, usually we have to start discounting. So again, if you can improve the quality of your plant up front, you can sell them through faster versus the ones that don't look as good. So it's harder to specifically measure, but there's definitely benefit there.
And you've got customers who if Stacy wanted to talk to them, you'd hook them up and say, ask them, they use it.
Yeah,
and if it didn't work, they wouldn't buy it a second time either. So.
Yeah, or a third or a fourth or a fifth. Yeah, we definitely have her talk to some people. That's not a problem.
All right, and I've got a follow-up question that'll tie right into that I'll do in a bit. But first, let's see. So let's talk a little bit about some application kinds of things. Mitchell wants to know if we put mycorrhizae or bacillus during propagation on a 104 cell liner, can we expect the mycorrhizae, the bacillus, the inoculant to stay with each plant to flourish and grow and kind of populate the untreated media as the plant is transplanted? I was curious about the same thing. Does the biostimulant or biocontrol keep up with the plant's root system as the plant grows in each bigger container or even out in the garden or field?
Well, I'm going to answer it. It depends on the product. So some products do require reapplication. So in that case, my personal feeling is yes, you're going to get some carry through. Absolutely. Because these organisms don't die off. Part of the reason why you do reapplication with some products is there may be, kind of an up and down. Populations go up, they go down, they go up, they go down. That's typical with biocontrols. My feeling is, yes, they will carry through. Bacteria reproduce at extraordinarily fast rates. Fungi are a little bit slower. Streptomycetes are also very fast reproducers. So I believe that characteristic will carry through into the next pot size, if you want to say. So you're taking 104s up to 4-inch or 10-inch hanging baskets. Yes, I think you'll get definitely some transfer over.
Okay. Are there is there anything you can do to damage your inoculant? Anything you might apply that's going to kill it?
Well, so as far as damage, when you're applying an inoculant, one of the things you got to look for is the inoculants. If you're going to apply it as a drench, for instance, you have to agitate it. Well, sometimes the agitation process can kind of beat up the spores or beat up some of the vegetative stage, which could damage some of it. But as far as once you're in production, yeah, look at things that are sterilants. So as an example, like a peroxide or peroxide type product could cause damage. But as I look at it, when it's applied to the growing media, it tends to foam up at the surface and it kills everything. But as it goes down into the growing media, it tends to become less active because the activation's taking place at the surface. So by the time it gets down through, it doesn't really hurt the microorganisms. So there are some things you have to be careful of. So as an example, sterilants could be a bit of a problem. Again, if you follow the recommended rates, a lot of the biocontrols will survive it because we find that actually bacillus is one of the hardest bacteria to kill.
Okay. But other say chemical fungicides or drenches, traditional chemical products tend to not bother?
Yeah.
You
So
know.
so like as an example, your herbicides, well, yeah, herbicides are a problem. Your fungicides, so if you take a look at the fungicides, a lot of them are targeted at how they basically affect the organism. So a lot of times that targeting doesn't necessarily affect the biocontrol if it's a fungal biocontrol, but you might want to check with the manufacturer and ask. Yes, there are always some chemicals that do not, do well with fungi or some of the bacteria. So bacteria, copper-based fungicides, for instance, if you do those at drenches, they may cause some problems. As I mentioned, soil sterilants like the Zero-Tol type products or the those types of products. I guess I shouldn't mention them by name, but those can cause some typical damage on any of these organisms. And as far as standard fungicides, again, look at ones that are more of a total kill. They may be more problematic versus the ones that are more targeted at how they kill the organism, so to speak.
Russ is asking about compatibility with different types of nematodes and other biocontrol agents, and mixing in compost tea, which an organic grower might do.
Sure.
Sounds like a good idea to me.
It sounds like a good idea. I don't think nematodes will be problematic unless the nematode would feed off of some of these fungal or bacterial organisms, but I don't think it's a problem. So what we find, for instance, like some biocontrols actually will attack other biocontrols. That becomes a very complicated situation, which I can't really explain in this talk, but you have to look at, some will attack the mycorrhizae, some will attack other, we'll see incompatibility. So for instance, we used to have a Bacillus subtilis in our product. When we mix that with the mycorrhizae, we found the two of them were not compatible. So the mycorrhizae was actually attacked a little bit by the Bacillus subtilis. So we replaced it with Bacillus pumilus. The two organisms are much more compatible. So not all organisms are compatible. So when you take a cocktail, throw a whole bunch of things together, it's kind of a luck of the draw. I will say, for instance, like some of the trichoderma species, great for root disease, but they do tend to be aggressive with mycorrhizal fungi.
Is there good research out there on these things? Or at least if a grower is wanting to maybe try this with that, and they ask you and you don't know the answer, where do you get the answer? Or do you just say, try it and find out?
Well, that's a problem. If you try and find out, you're not really sure if it worked or not. So it's kind of hard to say. Yeah, the research there, the idea of blending different types of microorganisms in the growing media is still kind of a new type of look. I mean, yes, we've seen it happening in certain industries for several years now, but nobody ever researched it. So there's not a lot of research out there on it. So it's kind of a new field. So if we got anybody in the research department listening or at a university, this might be a good research project for a graduate student.
Yes, Amanda was asking if you're working with any universities. Specifically, she was curious about the sort of, to put data to the anecdotal, hey, my plants are healthier, I sold more kind of a thing. So you're looking for partners.
Yeah, we'll probably be looking for partners. As far as like the anecdotal, instead of going with that with actual physical data, a lot of the research that we have done has been actually with grower trials. We've done some work with Laval University. I've done some work with a few universities in the States to look at the biologicals, but most of the stuff we had was, probably about 10 years old or so. Yeah. So some of the things have changed over the years, but yeah.
Still nothing like a grower trial to really, find out if it's worth it or not. A couple of temperature questions.
Yes.
Brian is asking about the optimal, or if there's an optimal temperature for applications. And Moose wants to know, Moose, with your ProMix Plus products that have the fungicides and mycorrhizae already blended in, are any of them damaged if stored outside in freezing temperatures?
Good question. So let's talk about the first one. As far as application, the temperature. So the thing that kills the inoculum which is kind of what you're applying, the fastest is extreme temperature changes. So, ideally you want to store them somewhere just above freezing. So like maybe upper 30s, low 40s to maybe 70, 80 degrees. That's the ideal optimum temperature storage for most of these biological organisms. Some companies would even like to have it between 40 and 50, really restricted. So refrigeration temperature. If the temperature swing takes place rapidly, so for instance, let's say you pull the stuff out of the refrigerator and you pop it in 70-degree water, there's some potential of damage that may take place there. Or if, let's say, the stuff is already at room temperature and you plop it in 70-degree water, no problem. But let's say you plop it into 45-degree water. Again, there could be some potential for a little shock for the organisms. I don't think it's going to kill them. But now let's say your hose has been sitting in the sun for a couple hours and you mix it and it somehow mixes in with that hot. Well, I guess it wouldn't be in there if you're putting it in through an injector. But let's say your water source got hot. Let's say it's 90 degrees or 95. You could probably cook some of your biologicals.
Sure.
Now let's talk about storage. So again, it's the temperature change, rapid temperature change that kills them. What we find in a soilless media is that when those biologicals are mixed into, like a pro mix or sun grower, whatever it is, peat moss serves as a natural insulator. So the temperature change is a lot slower. So the organisms tend to survive better. So they can survive freezing temperatures very well. A lot of the biologicals don't like the higher temperatures once you start exceeding at 100 degrees, 110, 120, depending on the organism. That's where you start seeing more die off. Freezing is not as much of a problem.
All right. Application timing. Juan wants to know, better to introduce, say you're sticking URCs, stick them right when you stick, or drench right when you stick, or wait till some root development happens?
Good question. So the microorganisms, obviously he's on the right track. The faster you can get them colonized, the better. But if there's no roots on them, there's no food source. So the organisms may hang out there. I would think it'd be better maybe to wait a week until you start getting some root initials developed so that they actually have some food and can start reproducing. You could do it at day one, but again, with a lot of drenching, with a lot of misting, you might leach out some of the biological organisms. So it'd be probably a little bit better to wait till there's roots on.
All right. Mitchell wants to know, how do you know you got the stuff in there? Is there a way to test to see that you've grown a population, or do you just notice the plants look really good?
Yeah. So what we do is we actually have a specific test we use for mycorrhizal fungi. We've actually been working with mycorrhizal fungi since 1987. Yeah, I was just graduating from high school back then, not to date myself or anything, but we've been working with it a long time so that we have a way to screen it, look for it, and find it. When it comes to bacillus, the problem with bacillus is there's natural bacillus that are found in peat moss. So when you try to plate that out, it's a little bit more difficult to find. We have found ways to do it, but standard labs, they just look at, kind of an overall look at the population. They don't usually break it down. So it's a little bit harder to find it, but yeah, we do have a lab that actually can detect it. And so we actually have people that will grow the mycorrhizal fungi, or actually take a sample of the media, plate it out, put plant roots on it, test it, look for the mycorrhizal fungi and the bacillus. They can actually look in a microscope and actually find it. And that's how we do the QC on the product.
All right. James is looking for a biocontrol for spider mites. But we've only been talking root systems here. So everything we've talked about is root-borne issues and health. Specifically, he was asking about beans and peas. Maybe if your plant is healthier, the spider mites will go to the unhealthy plant in your neighbor's yard or the next greenhouse down. I don't know.
Yeah. So think of spider mites like the lions. They go for the weak animal and take it down.
So maybe we can't help you on that one, I don't think.
Sorry,
James.
yeah, I can't help that one.
So it seems to me, kind of, we're going to sum up here. This seems like a no-brainer. Now, I know growers hate to add, even a penny of cost to a plant, but when you can pretty much, it looks like almost a guarantee that if you do this, you're going to grow a better plant. And I don't know too many growers who would buy a cheaper potting mix or anything else to save a penny if their plant got worse looking at the end. You always want the best looking plant. So why aren't more growers using biostimulants and biocontrols, do you think?
Well, I think it's a combination of a couple of things. First of all, some people are willing to try anything. So, and that's usually a low percentage of the number of people out there in general that are just doing that. But it's actually through word of mouth And that's where we see the strength. If somebody has success with it and they start talking to their friends, they start talking to grower meetings, whatever, that will tend to increase that. And some people are just simply looking at the cost saying, yeah, I understand there may be a back end to that, but on the front end, I just can't. Times are tough right now. It's hard. Competition's biting at my heels. It's hard to do that. So here's the other thing about biocontrols, a little secret. So when it comes to root disease, if you can grow the plant, you fertilize it properly, you water it properly, the biocontrol visually doesn't show as much of a benefit, but it's when things happen, like your injector's not working properly, or maybe somebody forgot to put fertilizer on the crop, or maybe you've hired a new grower and are overwatering. That's where the biocontrols really kick in and help, and also the biostimulants. So again, they're there to help with stress and problems. If you don't have the stress and problems, they're probably not quite as visually beneficial. But keep in mind, if you have them in there, they help the garden center and they also
Yep.
help the homeowner too.
Yeah, well, that's a good point because a lot of good growers say, "Hey, I've optimized everything. Look at this crop. How are you going to improve that?" True, but what does your retail customer, the end consumer, do to that plant? We've often seen what happens to them. Troy, any
Horror
tips
stories.
for those? We got a long list of growers on this call. Maybe some of them want to give it a try themselves. Any tips for running your own trials?
Yeah, so if you want to try it, obviously what I would do is I would take a section of your greenhouse, maybe take a bench or maybe a couple benches, depending what you want, and plant some plants, same mix, both mix, and then put a drench on one and grow the other one like you normally would, and do side by side. Make sure it's the same plant cultivar, and then just see for yourself. I can sit here and talk all fancy, but I'm telling you, if you try it, I think you're going to see there's definitely an advantage of using the biologicals.
All right, there you go. Couple more questions that have popped
Sure.
in. Claire has a few old bags of your stuff with biostimulant and ProMix with stimulant in it. Is the stuff still good? It's been sitting in storage for a year or so.
So the biofungicide, biostimulant, whichever one she's looking at, it's the same organism actually. So it will survive up to 2 years as long as the temperatures do not exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which usually it doesn't happen. So again, maybe the outside surface could sit out on a 90-degree day in the hot sun, but we find half-inch in, it tends to drop dramatically. I'd be more concerned about the wetting agent in the product being broken down and the starter fertilizer being gone. So she just simply have to maybe apply a wetting agent and then apply fertilizer right from the start. She should be good to go.
All right. Very good. Matthew wants to know, can you apply biocontrols along with your fertilizer? Mix them into your fertigation.
Good question. Some you can and some you cannot. So you'd have to check and see what the recommendation is for the biocontrol. The problem is when you put the biocontrol in with a fertilizer, that high salt content in the water through osmosis could suck the moisture right out of the.
Yeah, he mentions EC, and of course you're using a concentrate. You dump them into a super concentrated vat of something, and it seems to me you'd cook them.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to if you apply it with a second injector and put it in with the fertilizer solution, there I think you're fine. But yeah, you don't want to mix it the same concentrate tank.
Right. Very good point. Lastly, and Mia makes a point, it's like an insurance policy. You may not need it, but boy, you're glad you have it when you do, when something goes wrong, right? Good analogy there, Mia. Lastly, and Mitchell brought up a topic that I brought up even before we went on the air, and that is, all this sounds great, but especially if I want to buy some of that nice pre-mixed stuff so it save trouble, can I get ProMix this coming season? What's the supply like out there for peat moss and all the other stuff, Troy?
Well, as we kind of mentioned before, harvest this year is a little bit difficult in the east. It wasn't so bad in the central and west, at least for our company, and I would assume that would be the same for most of our competitors. But in general, we're shipping a lot better than we were. We were at 12 to 16 weeks last year. This year, we're looking at more to 6-8 weeks. In some cases, stuff's going out in 4 weeks. We're having better supply of trucking. Now, also keep in mind, too, that the cannabis market took a bit of a hit this year. So we see a slowdown in the requirements there. Some growers have kind of pulled back a little bit on some of their orders. So in general, there's not as much volume required this year. So far, we're keeping up pretty darn good. And basically, our major shipping season has been through October, November, December. So we are keeping up a lot better than we did in the past.
We don't have to hoard this stuff quite as much and then risk having it sitting out there going bad, like
Yeah.
or one question asker did. Another thing Mitchell brings up, though, is, and we actually have a webinar on this topic, the future of peat moss in the US or in North America. We've seen it being banned in Europe, which seems crazy, but there you go. He's asking about sustainable replacements we might see utilized in commercial greenhouses, but maybe the better question is, why are we thinking peat moss is not sustainable? We actually did a webinar on the fact that peat moss and the peat moss organizations are keeping it sustainable and viable.
Yeah, so basically with peat moss, when we harvest off of a bog, of course, obviously as we're harvesting it, we're taking it away. A typical bog, we're on anywhere from 20 to 50 years. So we're not actually going out there taking more land each year. We're actually on the same land, continuing to harvest. And then once we get to the end of that harvest cycle, we'll actually reinstate the bog, where we'll what we call restore it, or actually bring it back to a fully functional system. Yes, it's going to take a long time to replenish that peat that was taken, but we're trying to do the responsible thing and not just leave it go dormant and then walk away from it. As far as peat, what are companies doing? Well, that's an interesting question, because we're doing the same thing. We're looking at mixing alternatives in with our products to stretch out the peat supply. So as an example, let's say you mix in, wood fiber obviously is a big one right now. So if you mix in 10% wood fiber, that's 10% peat moss that you save. So you can now produce 10% more product. Or if you put in more bark, or you put in more core, assuming core doesn't become an issue, or perlite, all these things, the more of these other ingredients you add to the product, it extends the peat source. Yes, it is becoming, environmentally, we're not at the point yet where Canada is saying you can't do any more peat bogs. We do currently lease the lands. We don't own them, but they are getting to the point where they're starting to put a lot of restrictions on it. So for instance, in New Brunswick, we have to make value-added product. We can't just sell straight peat. So it has to be value-added. So ProMix would be a value-added product. But restrictions are coming. We know that's happening, and who knows where the future goes. But for now, peat moss is here, and it's still a viable product, and we're not seeing it going away anytime soon. But
that's right. And Mitchell, if you're go back into the archives. And I'll give you the website again in a second, and you can listen to an entire webinar on the topic of peat and the sustainability aspect of it, and how the whole, really not just you guys, but the whole industry is working together up in Canada too, because they know it's an important agricultural product, horticultural product for everybody out there. There are options now, but if suddenly next week we were cut off 100%. There's not 100% of options available for us.
Well, we would be in trouble if it were happening.
We don't want to be in trouble. All right. Well, if you have more questions, let me share Troy's email address with you there. Everybody up there at Premier Tech has these unusual 4-letter email addresses made of parts of their name.
Yep, that's correct.
So let me know when I'm looking at one of you guys. BUET at premiertech.com will get you, Troy. Make sure I got that one. There we go. Yes, I'm going to archive this webinar so you can rewatch it as soon as we're off the air here. GrowerTalks.com/webinars. Same place you signed up, and the same place you can find all of the archived webinars. Just scroll down a tad to the on-demand section. And that's really pretty much it. So on behalf of Troy, I want to thank you for a tremendous bit of information. You're a veteran of these webinars with me now, so I'm sure we're going to do it again sometime.
We probably will.
Thank you for that. So on behalf of Troy and everybody at Premier Tech, and for my stellar ball publishing staff who works hard so I don't have to, I'm Chris Beatty saying so long, everybody. Zoom wave, Troy.
Thank you all for listening.